Hello, welcome back to another pre-recorded Critical Eye patch. I don't know, whatever I end up calling it. This is, I think, I think we're on a good track here. I think that that the format has a good future in front of it. The feedback on the last Critical Eye patch was very resounding and very everyone was very much in agreement. I didn't really there were maybe a few that were kind of off to the side, but by and large, most people thought that the format had legs, but that the editing was trash. I'm being hyperbolic. No one was mean. Everyone was super, super nice. But I kind of agree. I tried to cut out as much context as possible just to get the video short and to make sure that, if I'm cutting things, I am cutting other people's content. I'm keeping my stuff, keeping it transformative, cutting out as much of the other person's content as I can. However, I cut out too much. There's definitely a middle ground between, unethical reacting, rebroadcasting someone else's content, and cutting so much context that the stuff that I'm doing makes absolutely no sense. So I'm going to try to strike a little bit more of a balance in this video. I'm not sure exactly what that will look like. We'll have to see. I probably won't know until I actually get into the edit. But the actual thing that we're doing today is watching a Critical Role Q&A from SDCC. I've never, which I think is San Diego Comic-Con. I've never watched a Q&A with Critical Role. Maybe I watched one like really early on, but especially since I've, really taken off with the series, I haven't watched any of their Q&As. So I'm very interested to see them kind of out of the table, see how they talk about things, see what sort of questions the critter community had at this point. Because one of the interesting but also sometimes weird things about Critical Eyes is that I am watching this 8 years after the fact. Even people in my chat that were there in the beginning, that was 8 years ago. 8 years ago, fuck, how old was I even? I think I was still in high school 8 years ago. I mean, no, I was in college. But regardless, it was a long time ago. And I think that a lot of times there's not necessarily like revisionist history, but there can be sometimes a whitewashing. You look at it with rose-tinted glasses, or conversely, you are very, very harsh on historical people and figures because we know a lot more in hindsight than the critters at the time did. So all in all, I'm interested in seeing this Q&A, and I think that this is a good format for that. I'm sure that I won't have a lot to say about most of it, but I think there will be maybe a few things that I have quite a bit to say about. So I'm also going to, in an attempt to go towards that like shorter length, while also, again, keeping enough context so you guys get it. I'm not going to include everything that I say. So there might be times where it seems like I'm getting cut off because I'm cutting myself off in the edit. This is going to be a little bit more heavily edited than the last one. Or maybe not more heavily edited.
Hi guys. So you guys are really, really witty with like comebacks and like how you're able to riff and stuff. I want to know maybe really quickly from all of you, where's your core? Like what did you grow up on that you pull from?
Intense abandonment issues.
Dude, that's an awesome question. I've been kind of, not overly impressed so far with the questions, to put it mildly. That's a super cool question. That's something I absolutely want to know from all of them. Is like, hey, you are all very impressive. You're a very impressive DM, very impressive players. You guys do these things that I want to model. Not just how do you do that, but like what is like the core thing that you think you pull from? Like people tell me all the time, hey, you sound like John Mulaney. I get that fairly often, and it's because I listened to John Mulaney's specials. I bought them on iTunes back in the day, and I loaded them onto my iPod, and I listened to them like over and over and over. And that was like very core to how I go about telling stories and going on tangents that I try to wrap back in later. Like all of these things are kind of baseline from that. And I'm super, super interested to know where their baseline is. So yeah, that guy based. The other questions I haven't really fucked with, but this guy's question I like a lot.
I want to know, maybe really quickly from all of you, where's your core? Like, what did you grow up on that you pull from?
Intense abandonment issues, I think, is probably the answer all the way around. Everybody? Yeah, no, I don't.
I was a big Upright Citizens Brigade person for many years, and I performed at the theater in New York and LA and did improv. I strongly encourage everyone to take an improv class. But I grew up watching Kids in the Hall. That was my sketch comedy jam. They're so good. Anyone else have any fun? Oh, or MST3K.
Oh,
I mean, that's a very like, it just all tracks, you know? It's the reason I like that question is because, you know, we could have inferred that, but it's good to hear exactly and to like reaffirm that like, okay, that is just like kind of the path. It's like, man, I watched a lot of sketch comedy growing up, and then I went and did comedy at the Upright Citizens Brigade, and I took improv classes. And like, I think sometimes we get into this habit, especially since the internet. And I've talked about this before, where it's like become cringe to try at things, and we see people that are just like so naturally talented and gifted from fucking day dot that we assume that if we're going to be good at something and we're going to be a professional at something, then we need to be born with like substantial natural talent. And if we haven't started trying already, it's basically too late. So I think it's good to hear these sorts of answers where it's like, oh, like I watched a lot of sketch comedy, then I went and did sketch comedy, and I took classes. I trained in improv and sketch comedy. And I assume that when they say backgrounds, I mean, I know obviously Taliesin was a child actor, Sam was a child actor on Broadway. But again, I think one of the things that I've always said about Critical Role, they're kind of lightning in a part of the thing that made them such a lightning in a bottle type effect is that they were all professional actors. Like now I know they all came from theater backgrounds, which makes sense to me. And then they all went into professional voice acting. And so, you know, when we look at them doing all of this stuff really, really well, we have to keep in mind that like it's 'cause they're professional actors. Like at the end of the day, if you're not out there doing theater, taking improv classes, actively working in the field of performance, it's incredibly unlikely that you will ever like reach their heights because they're constantly training their skills. You can absolutely attempt to model them, and you can practice performance through the medium of D&D. But at the end of the day, they have gotten structured and consistent performance training and notes and experience And that is worth a lot when we're like evaluating their performances on table.
Python, man. Yeah, a lot influenced by Monty Python.
You know, it's a muscle. You just have to keep doing it.
Everyone should take an improv class.
Yeah,
Muscle,
and
yeah.
the thing is, improv isn't just like it's a great tool for acting, but it's also just a great tool for being able to think quickly, being able to be brought with a situation you weren't expecting, and how to move fast on your feet to deal with it. So that's why a lot of people, even in like marketing and in team building exercises, do improv classes, because that skill set can be helpful in many different social aspects of your life, including Dungeons and Dragons and being a game master. So yeah, with a strong jaw.
Yeah, I think I fully agree with them. I know that there's some recent discourse about like D&D is not acting, D&D is not this, it's not that. But something that I learned, I think I learned it maybe in high school, but it really got hit into my head in college when I was in ROTC, is that everything you do teaches you something. Every experience you have applies to other areas of your life. And like taking an improv class is not going to just teach you improv to be used on stage and that is all. When I was writing, they call them bullets in ROTC. Basically just like highlights. It's just like a series of brags on yourself of like, oh, I accomplished this month and this, and I, got all of these things done. And really early on, my mentor told me, he was like, your bullets look really light. What'd you do this week? And I was like, honestly, this week was kind of a tough one for me. I didn't get a lot accomplished because I had like an esports tournament that I was participating in. So I didn't get to do a lot of like the self-improvement stuff. And he was like, well, what do you mean? You were in an esports tournament? I was like, yeah, it's for this game, whatever. And he's like, well, what'd you place? And I was like, well, we got like second. And he's like, put that. And I was like, what? I'm not going to talk about video games on my fucking bullets. And he's like, why not? Like, the placing highly in a tournament is an accomplishment. And he's like, you can phrase it a lot more professionally. And eventually I even put that I got to like plat in Siege, in Rainbow Six Siege, on my bullets at one point. in a very like obfuscated way. It was like I think I said received the platinum commendation from ESL, which is like esports league, or I think I referenced like the company that makes Rainbow. So it was like Ubisoft Montreal. Received like the platinum commendation from Ubisoft Montreal for I think excellent performance in team building exercises. Like team building, cooperation, and motor skills exercises, or something along those lines. And like, obviously, to a degree, I was kind of learning how to bullshit. But to another degree, being really good at Rainbow Six Siege did improve my teamwork skills. It improved my communication. It improved my fine motor skills. And just like they're talking about improv does all of these really good things for you and like to your brain that can be useful in so many other applications, obviously D&D included, but well outside of D&D. So I did not really internalize what they are saying for a while until I had to write those bullets, but I have found it to be incredibly true. Learning a skill and like going through these things can have such a large impact on like the rest of your life. Learning how to code taught me all about problem solving that I use very much outside of code. It taught me how to like break down huge, impossible looking problems into much more manageable steps. So yeah, I fully agree with that answer.
So my daughter.
Hello.
Hello.
That's
Oh,
awesome.
cool.
Yeah.
Hi.
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 So my question is both for you guys as players and as characters. And Matt, you can answer this too as NPC or just as a dungeon master.
Sure.
What do you think? What was your proudest moment in the campaign? Like something that your character did, or something your character accomplished? What do you think is your proudest?
Okay. Compared to like other like this is absolutely like, again, the type of question that I am into and that I'm interested in hearing the answer to. Yeah. Like, I think this is much more, this is an interesting thing of like, what do they value? Like, what do they think their coolest moments were? Not only because sometimes things don't translate on camera, you know? Like, things that are really, really cool or interesting in person or to, like, be a part of as a player may not translate to being cool to witness or watch as an audience. So I'm really curious as to, especially if there's any that, like, didn't stand out to us when we're watching. I'm really, really interested in that.
Well, that's the one that I'm proudest of is due to Laura and my character's nature. I always told myself in the beginning that if I ever had the ability to stop her from dying, that I would. So everything that went down in the tomb, pulling that off is probably my favorite accomplishment. It did.
That's cool. There's a very small thing that Liam just kind of mentioned there of due to Laura and I's nature, I think he means like Vex and Vax's nature. If I could ever stop her from dying, I would. And that sounds very basic. Like, oh yeah, I'm going to protect my party. But I think he means it very literally. And in this case, I mean, I think Vax was willing to give up his life, potentially, for Vex, for his sister. And it reminds me of something that me and a friend were just talking about in terms of Paladin, where Paladin is an interesting class because a lot of characters can have oaths, but Paladin is the only one where the oaths are mechanicized or mechanized, whatever. And we started talking about how, like, I think it is very interesting, like, when a paladin is confronted with, do I keep my oath? There's potential, like, mechanical consequences for it. That's another layer of paladin. But to kind of rewind that, I'm not saying every character needs to have an oath like a paladin, but I do think it's very interesting and honestly a bit of a weight off in terms of ease of roleplay. If you have a couple of like vague sentences or vague ideas that are sort of oath-like. Like, that's what I would kind of call this, is if I can ever do anything to make her not die or to bring her back or whatever, I'm going to do it. It doesn't matter what it is. Like, having that idea in a very, I don't mean this in a bad way, but in a very simplistic way, I think gives you things to fall back on when you're role-playing. So going through some hypothetical situations, trying to, suss out your character's personality, and then taking that vibe of a personality and trying to get some of the core parts of that person, or just the parts that are really easy to simplify, and squeezing those into the bonds, ideals, flaws. Like, this is like the ultimate, like, what you would put in a bond, in the bonds category on a player sheet. And trying to synthesize those things down, not necessarily to make it more rigid. This is all for yourself, but it's more to, like, if I'm in a situation where I'm not sure what to do, can I, in terms of role-playing, fall back on one of my flaws, one of my bonds, one of my ideals? And I think that having those is really good. And it's very good for you to have so that you can try and self-identify character growth. Because you fall back on those things until you don't. And so, is there a situation that we're going to see in the future, maybe, maybe not, where Vax is presented with a situation where he can either save his sister or he can do this very other, this other very important thing? Does he fall back on his bond, fall back on who he is? And if he doesn't, that's an incredibly singular point of character growth where you can like really heavily identify it. And then you can work with your DM to be like, hey, like this session, I kind of went against one of my bonds. I think that represents a big amount of character growth, and see if you can maybe do something with another character or with your DM to sort of process that character growth. Have an NPC that maybe is related to it. You don't have to, obviously. Like not every moment of character growth has to be zoomed in on. But that all is to say, I think that having these I use the word simplistic as like a good thing. Having these very simple things that are easy to fall back on, that aren't hard to evaluate in the moment, can make you faster at roleplay. It can make you more consistent, and it can make it very obvious to both you and others when you're having moments of character growth. And it'll make your character feel distinct. It'll help you from falling back on maybe tropes that you're not meaning to fall back on. By getting these very simple ideals, getting these very simple kind of oath type statements, it can help you maintain the things that make your character distinct from every other rogue, every other paladin, every other fighter. Vax is not the typical, Vax in a lot of ways is the typical edgy rogue. But he's also someone who cares incredibly deeply for his sister. That is not a tropey rogue thing. That is one of Liam's essentially oaths. Or not Liam's, Vax's essentially oaths. And it's what helps make Vax Vax rather than make Vax another rogue that's interchangeable from all the others. So yeah. Really cool answer. Yeah.
Did I ever think Trinket would have this big of an impact on the game? No. And we all learned a valuable lesson. Beastmasters need to have a way of having your companion stick around. Because, man, can you get attached real fast.
Really fast.
I had no idea. But it's kind of fun every occasion to be like, ooh. Thank you very much. Guys, thank you so much for coming.
Stand up.
Yeah, honestly, it's a good comment. If I ever am DMing a pet class, a pet subclass, whatever, like Beastmaster, I agree. It is important that, I think it's important that that person not be afraid of utilizing their pet. And like potentially having them die. Like, I think at this point, they should be able to just like resurrect Trinket, just like kind of for free. Like, there's a soul bond between Trinket and the fucking Pokeball, and now whenever Trinket dies, his soul goes back to the Pokeball, and then you have to feed the Pokeball an amount of gold, and it'll regenerate his body. I don't know, some bullshit like that. And the Pokeball wipes his memory of the death, so he doesn't experience the pain of death. Like, we need to create a situation where Trinket isn't like a pure hindrance, because, I mean, just like Matt, fucking first episode Craghammer, I had no idea that Trinket would be this big of an impact on the game. I was like, whatever. Who cares? Why are you being so, why are you keeping him so close? I actually had a comment on like either the first or second video that was critiquing me for my critique of how they were handling Trinket. Saying like, oh, like Laura cares so much. Like, Matt could never just kill Trinket off screen. And, I responded just being like, look, I've never seen this show before. I didn't know that Laura cared about Trinket. Why would she? Yeah, she can get another one. Obviously, she can't get Trinket specifically. And now I know why that's a fucking problem. But at the time, I mean, that's not how Beastmaster are designed. Beastmaster are not designed to, like, keep the beast around and to, like, form a bond with it, which is stupid. They should be. They should absolutely be. So I think at this point, if I remember correctly, the beast is now like a spirit, so it can basically do what I said of like reforming itself, much like, Pact of the Chain Warlock. But that's something that like 5e base Beastmaster really drilled into my head. And even more than, 514, watching Critical Role and watching Trinket, I'm like, okay, Trinket is really fun. Like, I really enjoy that Trinket is so impactful. But the mechanics do not allow for that. And the mechanics that are there is no, like, real functional difference between you being able to, like, get the same beast back versus just bond a different beast. There's no real difference between those two things. So especially after seeing Trinket, I'm firmly of the opinion, just let them resummon the same beast. So that they can form this like really cool, really well-developed bond. That's really cool. So yeah.
Hello, my God. I started watching only 2 months ago, and I started playing D&D since then. I'm making all my friends play, so... Join us. And I'm the DM, unfortunately.
Not unfortunately, that's
I know,
awesome.
but it's a lot of responsibility. So I was wondering, how do you balance what you tell the players and, like, afterwards? Like, if they've gone another direction, I have them asking me, well, what would happen if we went down that way? If we'd, like, chosen to fight that guy instead of, like, let him go, stuff like that.
I have one.
Great question. I love that question. That is like an incredibly stylistic choice on like how much you tell the players. I know I've talked to several DMs who have very differing philosophies on, how much they tell their players. It might not surprise you that I'm pretty open. I try to not tell them just enough I try to hide just enough to keep the curtain closed, or so to speak. I don't want them to ever see the man behind the curtain. I don't want them to see the levers, the wires, the ropes. But there is an aspect of if you can strategically pull back the curtain without showing anything, like if you pull back the curtain and it just looks like there was nothing back there, or there's just like more, stuff and content back there, whatever, and you don't show, and you manage to pull it back where it doesn't show any of the wires, doesn't show any of the levers, that can go towards making the world feel even bigger. It can go towards the mythos of you had so much prepped, you had every answer to any question they could have ever asked, you had a plan no matter where they went. If you can strategically pull back that curtain. That said, if you don't feel comfortable with that, or you don't feel confident in your ability to handle that in a way that won't feel, potentially bad for the players, just don't do it. I think the simplest heuristic is don't tell them shit. Don't tell them shit. They don't need to know. So if you don't have a kind of a reason and confidence in what you're telling them, just stay fucking silent. You should only tell them things if it has a benefit, and will make the situation more interesting for them. I know when I first started, I wanted them to recognize all the work I'd put in. You know, I think that's a pretty common new DM sort of feeling, is you want to tell them about all the things they didn't do so that they know that you had it and therefore that you put the work in. But that's a tricky balance. And regardless of if it's a tricky balance, that's making it about you. You're not making it, it's not about the group. It's not about delighting everyone at the table. It's not even really about making yourself happy. It is about getting credit, which I think is I think if you spend too long as a DM really wanting credit for everything you do, you're not going to like DMing. I'll be very real. Part of DMing is not getting credit for everything you do, but also getting credit for things you don't do. It's an interesting thing where you are facilitating this world, and if you facilitate it right, the world feels bigger than anything you could have possibly ever done. I see that all the time with the way that people talk about Matt. He is so good at DMing that he makes people feel like the amount of work that he has done is essentially infinite. He's never going to get credit for the actual work that he did, the actual amount of work that he put in. He gets credit for way more. Because he's really good at the magic trick of DMing, of making things feel big and feel real when they're not. So I'll put all that aside. Let's hear what Matt has to say about it.
Answer, and it's a very strong answer, and I think it helps facilitate the storytelling, and it's really the secret to being a dungeon master when a player comes to you with those questions, and it goes like this. I don't know. Because who knows at the end of going back there, and it leaves the mystery alive.
He does do that. He really does.
We try and get him drunk and try and squeeze.
This is another thing. There's obviously, he's being brief, and I think that it's a good piece of advice. It's like I said, if you don't feel confident in your ability to pull back the curtain, don't say shit. But he did add on an important thing that I didn't mention at all, which is they could always go back there, and the thing that was there doesn't need to stay there. Like, if you have a situation here, let me pull up Obsidian. Like, if you have a situation where the players, you have it prepped out, you're in, I don't know, a dungeon. The players are going through a dungeon. And you have this kind of diamond sort of divergence, right? You have this right here, where there are two paths that split off from each other. And let's say they could go either way. In fact, they could even go in a full circle if they wanted to. But they go through here. There's encounter X in here and encounter Y in there. And because of the corners, you can't see either from either of the junctions. So they go through here. They knock out fucking X. They do it. It's perfect. They have a great time. And then they go on. They see that they could go back, and they're curious, but they don't. There's a timer. There's a pressure. They got to keep going. They can't go back and look at what Y was. And then they keep going, they finish the dungeon, and they never get to see what Y was. It's always obscured from them. And they say, what was Y? What was there? We heard these sounds. What was that? There is the aspect of they could always come back to this dungeon. However, depending on the element that we're talking about. Like if it's a hamlet, sure. Yeah, sure. If it's a village, that sort of thing. They could always go back there. I would hazard to say that it's not likely they'll ever come back and see this unless there's a really distinct reason for it. If it's, in some random dungeon that they need to complete for a quest. But the reason that you still wouldn't tell them, potentially, is because Y doesn't need to stay here. This just becomes a blank spot in their understanding of the world. They'll forget about it. They'll know that there was something there. You've still accomplished the goal of making the world feel big, making there be choices. But that doesn't mean that you've consigned Y to the pit. This is how you stop from burning out on prep as a DM. Y does not need to stay here. It doesn't. You can pop it out, and you can say, all right, Y goes in the notebook. Maybe it was an NPC, an encounter, whatever. A magic item. Y goes in the notebook. It goes in the binder. Goes in whatever your organizational style is. And it sits there until you're, a month later, making a new dungeon, making a city, making a guild headquarters. And you're looking for something to put into this. And you go, there was that thing that they didn't see. I'll pop that in there. And you pop it in there. And then, if they do surprise you and they decide, we're going to go back to the dungeon. After you've already planted Y, let's say you reveal Y in this new secondary location. It's been revealed. It's out there. And they decide, hey, let's go another month later. We're going to go back to this dungeon. We're going to check out what was in that other branch where Y used to be. You do the exact same thing, but with Z. Z from some other town or dungeon that didn't end up getting used. They go into this dungeon and you pop Z in there. Or you improv it. Or if they give you enough notice, you create something again for this branching path. The things that you create as a dungeon master, as long as the players don't see them, they are not bound. They are not permanent. You have control over time and space. You have control over reality as a DM. And if you want to make really cool things, you can't spend, 10 hours making a Y that is really cool and then, depending on player choices, just never use it. Can't do that. You will run yourself ragged. So if they don't see it, pop it out and use it somewhere else. Or if you are really confident that they'll go back there, I'd say more than 70% confident, don't pop it out. Leave it there. I'd say that for any hub city. I don't think he was popping things out of Amon because they go back to Amon all the time. Same thing with Vasselheim, Whitestone. Those things are probably not getting popped out and floated. But NPCs in the refugee party. Probably Westrun to a degree. Craghammer. We can the Craghammer probably had a bunch of stuff. It was the mouth of a mega dungeon. They were assumingly going to spend a bit of time there. I'm sure that Craghammer was developed in detail. But they're probably not going back there. At least anytime soon, and he'll probably have at least a session of notice before they do. So everything that they didn't see in Craghammer, I'd pop it out. And you might have to change up some flavor. You might have to add, fun little modifications to make it fit in whatever the new place is. It's why a lot of times when I'm creating stuff, I'll create 80% of it that is totally flavorless, or is at least as low flavor as I can. I try to get all of the mechanical stuff done. And then I can add in that 20% of flavor depending on where I'm trying to put it. Is it going in a guild headquarters? Is it going in a dungeon? Is it going on the side of the street? Is it going into a marketplace? All of that kind of sits within this 20%. And so it's really easy if they don't end up getting used, I just discard this 20%. And I take the 80% and I pop it out and I move it somewhere else. And this 20%, at least for me, is also very easy to improv. Now that said, if this 20% isn't easy for you to improv, you could try making it a little bit more generic so that it's easier to pop out and move. But all of those things are just to say. That's why I think I think his advice is good, and I was making it a little bit complicated by saying, oh, maybe there's some times to reveal it. I think the best heuristic is just don't say shit. Only tell them if there is absolutely no chance that it could ever get reused in any way. You will never be able to reuse it somewhere else. They will never be able to come back and rediscover it. And those two things have to be true, and revealing it is additive. You're not revealing it for your own ego. You're not revealing it to get credit. You are revealing it because you think it will have a legitimately positive effect, and it will delight your players. I like that the 2024 PHP kept saying delight your players. I don't know. It's a fun word. And I agree with it. If you think that revealing that will delight them, absolutely. But the default should be don't say shit. Because that's going to help you not burn out, not run out of shit, that sort of thing.
Hello! Hi, I'm Kyla. Now to follow up a completely silly question with a serious question, I'm looking to create a campaign or a series of one-shots for my young nephew who is on the autistic spectrum. Matt, in particular, I was wondering if you would have any advice on systems or store crafting that could be used towards this purpose. And Liam, if you have any advice from doing campaigns with your kids.
How old is he?
He's 8, 9.
Okay, well that's right where my son is. I would suggest, and I've said this before, but I would suggest small bite-sized chunks. Let him grow into really complicated games if he really comes to it. But have one branching off thing maybe, and you can choose there, and it'll feel like the most mind-blowing thing to him. But just, I would keep it simple in the beginning, which is the same advice you give everyone, which is start at a tavern, start in the town, start in the swamp. So you don't have to create a universe, and just slowly build out from there. And I think when I first started, I was playing all this stuff and not getting to like 20% of it, so it's
Yeah, I think, I don't know what's going on with their audio, but I think about that often, and one of my mega mechanics that I'm working on, I won't even show it here. But one that I'm working on is essentially this idea of, start your world building where your characters are, wherever that is. Your characters are here. And this gets a lot of detail. This gets a 10 out of 10 in terms of detail. And then you zoom out a little bit. And you say, okay, this ring around their area, this gets an 8 of detail. The ring around that area, the region that all of these are contained within, that gets like a 4. And then the region around that gets like a 1. These are because I fully agree. I think that there's kind of these how do I say it? There's competing desires, I think, when you're world building as a DM, especially a new DM, where you want to be prepared for anything that your players throw at you. You know that you're never going to be fully prepared, but you want to feel like you have at least something to bounce off of. Totally, I really feel that. But simultaneously, I talked already this video about like making the world feel big, feel real, even though it definitely isn't. And I think one of those kind of factors is something like Marquette, right? I think that Marquette, for the characters in Vox Machina, sits solidly out in this one column. Where, like, I don't know what Matt has prepped for it. But in terms of, like, what he's told them things that are very solidly within the one sphere of, like, who its leader is, its general vibe. That's pretty much it. what the continent and like the main city on it. It's basically like vibes, like on this one, it's like vibes and like one landmark for anything that's out in this one area. It's been something I've been thinking about a lot. And then as you get like physically, distance-wise, closer to the PCs, and then you can start making it more and more detailed. And it's one of the things that I think is challenging about especially high-level D&D later on down the line is when I say, as you get closer physically, distance-wise to the PCs, as PCs get group teleports and cheap teleports at that, and very efficient and very long-range teleports, what qualifies as an 8, a 4, a 1 shrinks. It goes closer and closer into like needing more and more detail. And I think maybe a better way to think about it, because of that teleportation aspect especially, is how long, like in fiction, would it take characters to get from X to Z? That kind of depends. That distance, that like interval, that time interval, kind of matters where they are in here. So it's like this is like 0. Like it takes them literally no time. They are there. The T0, this should be where like most of your detail, most of your prep is. Then it's like T, like, we'll put it in terms of like days. So it would take, days to travel to, but you wouldn't go any further than that. It should be like within 8, because you want to be able to be prepped for if they kind of throw you a curveball and want to go somewhere. But, they're not going to be able to get too far away, depending on their travel capabilities. And so those are the sorts of places that should have 7, or should have 8, maybe 7 in terms of like a level of prep. And then this is like T weeks, and this is like T like months. So if it's going to take them days to travel to, you get like an 8 in prep. Weeks, it's like a 4, and months, it's like a 1. But it's tough when you start getting things that can really teleport them really easily. So I think that's one of the reasons that running higher level D&D gets kind of more and more difficult, is because these time barriers, like the reason that I'm measuring things in terms of prep by in fiction time barriers is because those are the most likely to be a good measure of how much out of game time you will have. Like, are you going to have another session to prep for it? In this segment, in the time in days segment, maybe not. They might be able to get there within a single session and interact in a pretty significant way. Weeks? Maybe not. And so there is a discussion of like, okay, well, should we even prep these two at all? And this goes into the competing factor of, man, I want to make the world feel big. And I think that that's what these like 4 and 1 layers can do. Like talking about Marquette in Vox Machina, it can make the world feel huge. It can make you feel like there's so much going on that you're only getting a fraction of. And that's very cool. That makes the feeling of playing within the world really cool. But you really don't need that much to instill that feeling. You really just need to drop the occasional hint about it. It just has to like vaguely exist off in the distance in the mists. You can see the silhouette of it. Well, that's maybe what to call this tier. It's like the silhouette tier, where it seems like there are things out there and the players feel like, oh, well, there's so much out there. We can only see the silhouettes because we're so far away. If we went over there, it would get more detailed, even though in reality, the silhouettes are all that exist. If they could somehow transport over there instantly, they would just see little cardboard cutouts in the mist. But I think that this sort of process of kind of determining your levels of prep, but always centering it on where the characters are. And I think this is the really important thing to take away. No matter how you define it, no matter what these numbers are for you, these time ranges, the further away it gets from the PCs, the less you should prep. And that should be like a scale. You should have it. Your scale should not be flat. You should not be putting in the same amount of effort into a location or a plot or a character that is in the same city as your NPCs as you do to an NPC or whatever that's on a different continent. Those two things should not get equal amounts of your attention as a DM when you're prepping. So, that's a long-winded way of saying I think that's very fair for Liam to say. Focus small. Don't build out a whole world. I've never DM'd for anyone. Well, I guess I've DM'd for people younger than me, but not that much younger than me. So it sounds like, at least what he's saying, is go even more extreme on that. So maybe drop off the third tier, make the fourth tier, make the third tier a 1, make the second tier like a 2 or a 3. And then everything else is prepped around the character. And keep it straightforward so they can just kind of follow a path. And like I guess he said, put in like one branching decision. I'm like I said, I've never run anything like that. That all makes sense to me. But yeah, it's cool to hear from someone who has run for kids and has experience in this. It all makes sense to me, but I've never run in that environment, so I would, if I were going to, I'd probably, defer to exactly this advice because he has experience there.
Yeah, I would say also try the best you can to present challenge without presenting character death as an immediate opportunity. For younger kids or people that are just getting introduced to the system, especially with any sort of like learning disability, you want to make sure that they feel like it's a welcoming and comfortable place where the challenges are difficult and success is really fulfilling, but nothing is worse than taking somebody who's new and fresh to that experience and going, okay, that's great, you're a wonderful adventure, you're a hero, and now you're dead, make a new one. It can alienate very quickly. So I'd say, definitely introduce challenge and danger, but be receptive to let things slide more than you would with like a more casual or hardcore gamer that universe, definitely.
I'm massively fudging rolls for these kids, and but they don't know that. And they encountered a dragon. I'm just doing the basic starter set that was just a ghost release, and they had an encounter with the dragon, and they thought they were going to die. They didn't, and they loved it. So it's okay to give them a little, shake. But,
a little scare.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
No worries, good question.
I mean, obviously, Liam is saying, I think he's very much saying, like, I'm fudging it because they're kids. But, like, that's kind of my entire philosophy around fudging. It's exactly what I've said. It's exactly what he just said of they don't know I'm fudging, and the encounters feel great. Because, and this can be expanded out, but, like, let's just look at their situation. They would never get to fight a dragon because it's too hard. Honestly, like they would just never get that really interesting, cool experience. They would probably have to fight just less interesting stuff. That's not to say easier or that. It's just that they would probably have to fight like things that are more boring because more interesting encounters inevitably involve stacking conditions and mechanics and things that you don't normally have to think about and like really hyper specific strategies that work in other base mechanics. the more interesting an enemy is and a combat gets, the more they're going to have going on most of the time. And so for Liam, he wants them to fight an interesting monster, but they're kids. They can't. If they fought it raw, they would die, and that's not fun. So he fudges for them, but they don't know he's doing that. I think and this is kind of my fudging philosophy, is that you can scale that concept up, and you might need to occasionally. If you are trying to create incredibly interesting encounters as a DM for your adult players, you're very gritty, very, experienced gamers, we get into the territory where you might make something so interesting that you don't know how to evaluate its power anymore. And so there's a decent shot that you may throw them into an encounter that is interesting, that is really cool, that they would really love, but you don't realize until you get into it, oh, fuck, I didn't think about this interaction having this effect on the party. They're toast. This is a way more dangerous encounter than I thought. This might TPK them. I didn't foreshadow that. I didn't give them any signals that this was going to be as dangerous as it's winding up being. Oh, fuck, I fucked up as a DM. And obviously, the more you design, the better you'll get. But eventually, you're going to have to start taking big swings. And unless you're going through and play testing all of your encounters beforehand, which is a ludicrous amount of work that I don't think anyone is doing, you are going to eventually find yourself in a situation where you have misjudged your own encounter. And you might need to fudge a little bit, to pull some of the levers, to make it either easier, or let's go the vice versa, make it harder. Maybe you have an interesting encounter that you've been winding up to. You have been foreshadowing how interesting it's going to be. You've been really building up to it. And you forget that one of the monsters that you use has vulnerability to the damage type that the rogue uses. And they turn one sneak attack and crit, and they knock out one of the things in one hit. Is that interesting sometimes? Yes. Sometimes it is super interesting for them to totally trivialize an encounter. Other times it's not. Other times that is very boring, and they will leave feeling unsatisfied. If you've been building up to this big, scary bad, taking it out in one hit might feel cool for a second, but then it's wait, is this the guy that we heard all about? Even making it take 2 hits, something as simple as that. Just making it take one extra big hit, whatever. That sort of thing can sometimes save the interest of a combat. And in the same way that I was talking about, as a DM, you can't do things for you. I was talking about, you don't reveal things just because you want credit as a DM. Don't make a combat arbitrarily harder because you don't think that they've done enough. If it's interesting for them to trivialize it, let them trivialize it. But trivialization sometimes is cool. But I think it's mostly cool when it is the result of effort, not when it's the result of pure randomness. Now, if they've put, if that rogue has put, so much effort into upping their damage and they're like an assassin, and they fucking applied poison ahead of time to do a bit extra, and maybe they dipped Paladin to get a fucking smite that they throw on top of it, right? If that's their big focus as a character, is doing a ton of turn one-shot damage, then it is probably very cool for them to defeat this big bad in one hit. That's actually probably super cool. But if it's like a fighter or a ranger or, someone, or even a rogue that hasn't put all of that time and effort, and it's just the way that the dice went and you forgetting about a resistance, and this big bad that you've been building up in their heads goes down like a chump, that's not always super interesting. I think, like, for example, like Umbrasyl, it's interesting to trivialize that combat, or to not even to trivialize it, to allow it to be trivialized, because they put in a ton of effort towards that. Percy invented something. They had the herd managing things. Keyleth hid all of it ahead of time. Like, they put in a ton of effort towards trivializing that combat, so the trivialization is their reward. But if a combat becomes trivialized, if it goes way under the power that you had foreshadowed, just because you're a fucking idiot and you forgot about something, or they hit you with something that you were not prepared for at all, that isn't particularly clever, you just kind of forgot that they had it because they're a high level and they got a bunch of shit. Those are times where I think you could maybe fudge it to make the combat slightly more difficult. And vice versa, if you just forgot about an interaction that is absolutely decimating your party totally unexpectedly, you can fudge that down. It's all for making up in the inevitable gaps in your prep. No DM is ever going to prep perfectly, and the more interesting things you try to do, the harder that prep gets. The more things there are to keep in consideration. Like I talked about, the more interesting you make a combat, the more mechanics you have to work in. And so the more mechanics you work in, the more factors there are within this encounter's overall balance, and the more opportunities for overlooking something there are, positively or negatively. So fudging should just be used to make up for that. And by the way, when I say fudging, because this is gotten I think a bit misunderstood when I've talked about it in the past. I don't just mean changing numbers on dice rolls. That is a type of fudging. But I also think like making the enemies act less tactically all of a sudden. Like if they change their tactics to be less effective mid-combat, that's a form of fudging to me. Making them take the party prisoner when that had not been established, and that was not something you had planned on doing, and it only kind of fits within their lore, but you don't want to TPK your party. That is also fudging to me. Anything that you do to adjust the difficulty of an encounter midstream that you didn't have prepped beforehand, I consider that fudging. And from that perspective, I think fudging's super okay. If you don't want to change dice rolls, if you want to roll all of them out in front, sure, absolutely, go for it. I think that can have great implications for your table, depending on what kind of players you have. But keep in mind that you need to have levers that you can pull. You need to be able to change the tactics of your enemies mid-combat. You need to have potential environmental hazards, banes, boons that you can throw in there that makes sense within the fiction, but maybe you weren't going to do unless they were looking dire, unless things were looking dire. All of those sorts of things I consider to be fudging, because you are reacting to the results and then basing the reality of the game off of those initial results. That to me is fudging, and I'm in favor. As long as your players never can tell, because that's the worst. If they know that you're changing it in or against them, like in favor of them or against them, and they can see that feels horrific. That feels terrible. But if you want to start running more interesting things, you need to have levers that you can pull that your players can't see and that you're good at hiding. Because otherwise, your party will never be able to fight the equivalent of your dragon, which is going to arbitrarily limit, I think, the amount of fun you can have.
Hello. Starstruck right now. Give me a second. My name is Elvin. I'm a fledgling dungeon master. I just started throwing together one-shots and homebrews for me and my friends because I've always loved the game, but nobody around to play it until I got them into it. So I'm currently torn between running the homebrew and making everything good and safely for them so they can learn their characters and get more into it, or just dropping a shitload of dangerous monsters on them and seeing how it goes. I mean, I already killed one with a pit fiend, so...
What level are they?
3.
Oh! Okay. First off, don't do any more of that. Like, if I dropped the pit fiend on their asses, they'd probably wipe. So, like, okay.
Oh, I want to hear this. I want to hear this from Matt. Because I'm sure that guy is great. I'm sure that he's delightful. I do not want to assume anything about him. But that sort of thing of like dropping a pit fiend on a party of level 3s, like, okay, let's just see here. Like, this thing is a level is a CR20. This thing's a CR20. And it's a very similar thing with like Liam's one shot of him including a lich. It's like, no matter how much you think you are nerfing this pit fiend, right? No matter how much you drop its HP, no matter how much you take away its resistances, you are probably not going to be able to accurately judge the challenge that you're sending them all into. And this is where, again, my kind of fudging philosophy kind of comes into play. Of like, okay, you want to, like clearly he wants to run more interesting encounters. And especially when you're new and you don't have a good sense of maybe the intricacies yet, the more interesting encounters are often the more interesting monsters, which are often the higher CR monsters. So like I understand the desire to put in a pit fiend there, but you have to think about why you're doing that. Are you doing that just so that you can have fun during a combat as a DM? Like, are you doing that because you just want to play and you have access to all of these monsters and you just kind of wanted to see what it would be like? That's you thinking about you. That's not you trying to think about the entire table. Everyone at the table should be thinking about the entire table. And killing someone with a pit fiend at level 3 is not interesting. That's not an interesting death. Now let's imagine an alternate scenario where he wanted them to fight something like the pit fiend. He had a really specific idea in his head of this enemy that the pit fiend stat block is the closest to. And so he does the same thing that Liam did during Liam's quest, where he takes the stat block and he removes a bunch of things, lowers the health a lot, lowers the AC, like Liam did with the Lich. And then, you run with that. That falls into the topic that I was talking about earlier of the more interesting you make those sorts of combats, when you start making up all this homebrew, really wildly changing stat blocks around, the less accurately, or you're not going to be able to judge your own encounters as accurately. At level 3, you shouldn't be getting killed by a pit fiend. I feel very definitive about that. Very confident. The pit fiend stat block is not close enough to CR3 that you can actually nerf this and accurately understand how you have nerfed it. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, there is no situation in which you can just take stuff out of this, modify the health, and know that it's a CR3. Unless you're like basing it, I guess, off of a separate CR3 creature. But then at that point, just use that CR3 creature. Let's throw out the pit fiend at this point. So there's just no way that can happen. But again, if you want to make something interesting, you want to run a combat with the pit fiend's fear aura. You know, you think the fear aura is really cool. It has this telepathy feature. It has true sight. Like, you want to run with all those sorts of things. And you're trying to maybe run an interesting encounter. Again, I'm trying to assume the best. That's where you need to have fudging in your back pocket. You have to. Because you are the one that is getting wacky and wild and weird with it. And your players should not get punished for that. You do not want to kill one of your characters or one of your player characters because you could not figure out how to nerf this pit fiend enough for a party of level 3s. That is, and if you say like, oh, I don't care if I kill any of them, that is either a conversation. If that's not a conversation that was had during session 0, that like, hey, I'm just not going to care about the balance. You might just die occasionally. That has to be a conversation that's had. If it's not, it's bad. And even if the conversation is had, that doesn't sound super interesting as a campaign. That kind of removes a lot of the stakes to me. If they know that you're just kind of not giving a shit about the balance. So I don't know. I don't see, and I think that, you know, Matt's initial reaction of, first off, don't do that, kind of says it all. Like, there's no scenario that I make up where what was done was like a good thing or like part of like a good DMing strategy and philosophy. I don't see it. And yeah, you either need to throw very balanced, very understandable encounters at them, or you need to be ready if you're trying to throw something interesting at them that you can't judge the difficulty on. If you're going that direction, you need to be ready to fudge it. Not to make them win, just to make them not die. Like, I know that in one of the comments where I talked about fudging, someone said, you know, I never throw a combat at the party if it has the chance of TPKing them. That's fine. That's, you know, essentially not arbitrarily. That is self-imposing a limit on how complicated you can make your encounters, right? Which is fair. I mean, that's fine. If you want to impose that sort of limit on yourself, that's totally cool, which is, I think, kind of what this guy is getting at in his question. Like, should I impose that limit on myself? Or should I not? And the commenter, when we were talking about fudging, said, also was like, the adversaries almost always have an excuse to take the PCs hostage rather than killing them. And then we go into, you know, basically a new mini arc or, you know, maybe major arc. I think that's also fine. But that's, to me, if every adversary you fight, you're either going to beat or they're going to take you prisoner, that's a form of fudging. to whether or not, we're talking about, because not every adversary would do that. So maybe it's not fudging. Maybe it is just very, very careful adversary choice. But that's just imposing more limitations. So you have to choose adversaries that would always take them hostage and would never TPK the party. That's a lot of self-imposed restrictions on your encounter building. So you can either do that. If you really hate fudging, you never want to fudge, you do have to impose some of those limits. I think that's unfortunately going to make your combats overall less interesting, but it's fair if that's what you really care about. If you don't want to do that, you have to figure out a way of fudging. And again, with fudging, the players have to not be able to realize that you're doing it. And so the weirder and wackier you get, like them being able to kill a pit fiend or a pit fiend running away or taking someone hostage, like all three of those things, which are in kind of the fudging repertoire, are going to feel weird because it's a pit fiend. There is still an upper level of interesting where if you go beyond that, if you just throw balance and caution totally to the wind, there's no amount of like safe fudging. There's no amount of hidden fudging you can do. You would have to like visibly outwardly fudge or kill one of them. And killing one of them to a pit fiend is lame. So what will Matt say?
Well, it was an illusion. At the end of it, it was an illusion.
I recommend, if you want to play like a fun one-shot just to get a feel for monster balance and stuff.
It was an illusion. Okay, it was an illusion of a pit fiend. So this is what he means by homebrew. That was how he justified trying to nerf it down, at least is what I'm getting from that. But still, everything I said very much still stands. It sounds like it falls into he saw the pit fiend stat block and he tried to nerf it down by making it an illusion while still being able to use the fun pit fiend stuff. My brother in Christ, you are not prepared to try and nerf a CR20 down to a CR3. It's just, it's just not possible. I don't think anyone can do that. You just have to make a new thing at that point.
You can throw in some crazy monsters and some characters they made for fun and see how well they last. If you're trying to keep people engaged in D&D, I would recommend doing more of the first one, where you develop, a safe, still dangerous, but like a fun way to introduce them to the world and keep them engaged in the story, and then you can kind of ramp up the difficulty as they get better and more invested. No more pit fiends, not for like 12 more levels.
What if they're talking mess about killing all my monsters? Then can I drop it on them?
What?
What if they start talking mess about all my monsters? Then can I drop it on them?
Well, yeah, if they start giving you shit, they drop their ass. But like before, but up until that point, be safe.
We live in fear. We live in fear. Okay, guys. My question's for any of you who have actually.
Yeah, I mean, I think that Matt is obviously trying to keep it He's trying to keep it succinct and concise. Yeah, no more pit fiends. No more pit fiends. And I'm a total fan of ludicrous like one shots. I'm a total fan of absolutely ludicrous, silly one shots. But if you're actually trying to do a campaign, the challenge needs to ramp. Even in a situation where you're doing like a sandbox campaign, you're doing an open world, the challenge should still ramp. So like your world should be made of difficulty regions and curves and these kind of intersecting and interacting regions. So if this is kind of the setup, right? Let me get all that. So let's say that this is CR, I don't know, less than 3. This is your starter zone. then anything touching this shouldn't ramp up that quickly. So all three of these touch it. So, we're talking probably CR less than 5. CR less than 5. Now, if we want this to be, and then, CR less than 5. But let's say, okay, I want there to be maybe a harder challenge in this direction. Let's add a little buffer region right here. So now this is also CR less than 5. But now, because this one isn't touching the CR3, we can now make this like CR less than 7 or less than 8. And you can start ramping it up more rapidly as they level up because they'll have more defensive and mobility options to be able to escape. So even like this, for example, we could have this be like CR. So we'll call this one CR less than 5 still. CR less than 8. And then like CR like less than 13. And these ramping difficulty areas, number one, not only make sense like in fiction and like from like a verisimilitude aspect, but they provide natural foreshadowing. If we go from here into here and we notice the ramp up, and then we go into here at the into this CR8, we are going to feel our players are going to feel this ramp up. And as a DM, you should also be doing very deliberate foreshadowing, but just the environment will help you with that danger foreshadowing. And if your players acknowledge and ignore it, that's on them at that point. That's one of the fun parts about sandbox style things. But even in total sandboxes, we should not have, CR3s right here and then fucking pit fiends in here, right? We shouldn't go from a CR3 to a CR20. This is not enough. This is too big of a gap between those two that your players are never going to grok until it's too late. So you want to have a much more gradual gradient, a gradual build-up, and ideally, now this is, a little bit harder to run, but, all of these lines are a little bit more blurry. So maybe on the line between these two, maybe it's, the CR4 area. You know what I'm saying? Or maybe this is like exclusively CR3s, and then this is like some 4s and 5s, have like a nice gradient kind of transition to help warn them about what is up ahead. And if you always do, where they have to escalate in some sort of stair steps, even if the stair steps are small, as long they don't have to be the same width, but they all need to be the same height. So you don't want it to be like up, to there. This is a bad thing when it comes to danger ramping and to natural foreshadowing. This is bad. You always want it to be the same vertical increase, but it doesn't necessarily matter if the horizontal increase is the same. Pretend that all of these verticals are the same. These, you got to be careful with them, but these are much more okay because you're providing them with data points where at any point, after this, they could choose to not keep going. They could choose to turn around. Now, like I said, the details of this relationship can be different as you ramp. You can actually slowly increase the height of steps, but it has to be a slow increase. Like, so you can have this kind of curve, it's okay. But especially if you're like a first timer, making it more straight, I think is good. And if you're in like a not sandbox style, if you're in a more not necessarily linear, but in a more like planned campaign, then obviously you have even less to worry about.
And my question is to Matt. I've been trying to find groups to play Dungeons and Dragons for a frustratingly amount of long time. And it's gotten to the point where I figured that I should try making a game as a dungeon master. But my question is, do you think someone should experience playing Dungeons and Dragons as a player before DMing, or should they just study up on some of the books and then DM without having played the game previously?
I don't think it's.
I wonder if Matt played or DM'd first. I DM'd for so long before playing. I mean, I DM'd for like 2 years and never played a single session. Well, during that time I played 1 session of 3.5, so not even 5e. I don't know. They're just 2 different games. You know what I'm saying? It's 2 different experiences. I don't think one necessarily I don't think one really prepares you for the other, if that makes sense. Like, my first time playing, it was a very disorienting, very different experience. And I'm sure it goes the opposite way. I don't know. It's hard. This is like a weirdly hard question that I don't know Matt's background on like where he started, but I'm really curious as to his answer to it, because it's not really something that anyone can actually answer, because no one can have the experience of both playing for the first time and DMing for the first time. Like you can't have it. You can't know the experience, like the transitionary experience of both, without just like talking to people essentially. And like asking this question to a bunch of people. So, I mean, fair enough on asking it. But I don't know. My instinct is that it doesn't matter. But I don't think either one really prepares you for either. In both, you have to learn the rules. Maybe it depends on like what are your other general skills, but then those are just preparing you for it. So I don't know. I'll put it like this. It's like, I think you should do the one that you are going to be the most comfortable with. Like, I think whichever one will provide you like the most joy and the most interest is the one that you should start with. And because they kind of involve different skill sets and have different strengths and different weaknesses. Like, if you struggle with not being the center of attention, let's say, if you struggle with like sharing airtime and wanting to always suck up all the air in the room, you should probably be a dungeon master first. Because then you will be able to learn the mechanics, you will be able to understand the game before you play, and you're having to actively fight your natural urges. Guilty. But if you're someone who doesn't have a lot of creative writing experience, if you are someone who, is not very comfortable with improv, potentially, you're, someone who doesn't have maybe any experience in like any sort of mechanical design, any of those sorts of things, you might want to play a character first. Because like there is still improv and thinking on your feet that is required as a character, and as a player, but not nearly as much as a DM. So again, it might help you get into the hobby, learn the rules, and then I think you can kind of do either. I think once you know the rules, neither really prepares you for the other. They have similar things where they like overlap, but like in terms of like what's going to prepare you to do either, they're kind of like, it's a skinny intersection. They're just 2 very different experiences.
necessary, especially nowadays where you have more opportunities to have examples of dungeon mastering done, whether it be like our show or High Rollers or Real Roleplay, or they're all a bunch of really, really great actual play podcasts about that show different styles of dungeon mastering and storytelling. So you get to watch those, kind of handpick what elements you like and would like to kind of emulate or incorporate into your storytelling methods, and then you can just create from there. It helps from a player standpoint because you can understand how the game mechanics work and how it is to be and think in that moment. But thanks to videos like Live Play and our show, you have an example of that experience already. So I wouldn't say it's as necessary as it used to be. If you're feeling confident and you have a good story to tell, just get a decent grip of the rules. It doesn't have to be perfect, but just enough where you...
I think that this is even, I think that Matt's answer is kind of rooted in an even like a somewhat older school way of thinking. That I wonder if you asked him this same question after he's made Daggerheart, or just like asked him it for Daggerheart. I wonder if he'd say the same thing, because this is, I think the subtext to the answer is that the DM should be the most knowledgeable on the rules at the table. In this case, not a perfect knowledge. He's not saying that. But I think that there's at least that's some of the subtext that I'm reading, is that you need a mechanical basis in order to DM, whereas you don't need that as a player, or you need a lesser extent of it as a player, which I frankly just disagree with. And maybe maybe I'm like majorly biased here because I DM'd with not having played at all. None of my friends had played. We all just learned together. Like, we had the PHB and the DMG fucking out on the table. We're all checking rules together. We're looking things up. And so that was the experience that I had learning it. And it really solidified in my head of like, you can just DM. Like, you really don't need to understand it, especially if any of your players know the rules. Like, if any of your players have played before even and can like help you with rulings, you do not need to have played before. You do not need to like really have a firm grasp of the rules. You should attempt to. Like, I'm not saying, fucking go in there and wing it and just make shit up. But I don't think that you need to have played and experienced the rules in order to get enough of a grasp to then DM. I think you can just read through the books, try to be very careful and cautious and cognizant of them, and then go for it. And I think that we're sort of coming to a new understanding of like the DM as the referee, and the referee should know the rules probably better than the players, probably. But I don't think that we would look at I don't think we'd look at football and say the referee has to have played in the NFL before they can ref, right? Like, you're not looking at basketball and saying that the NBA refs need to have been professional basketball players before they have the qualifications to ref. Those aren't the same skill sets. And both should know the rules very well, and it is the ref's job to enforce the rules. But I don't think that being a player gives you an inherently better understanding of said rules ahead of time. But I don't know.
You feel like you can pretend like you know what you're doing when players ask you, you can be like, oh, just roll a dexterity check. It may not be what most people would do, but the players don't know that, and just fudge it and have...
Absolutely, yeah. Absolutely. Fudge it. Who cares? If you say, it's kind of like when someone asked what the flower of Westrun was, Matt immediately answered, I think it was like white iris or something. It was something relatively specific, and all of the players go, whoa! And I looked over at chat and I was like, did I miss something? Is that like a callback, or what's happening? And chat was like, I think they were just, they were shocked that he had made a flower for Whitestone, or for Westrun. And I was like, he didn't make a flower for Westrun. You know what I'm saying? And they were like, oh, but it was like so specific, and he said it so quick, like, even if it was improv, it was very impressive. And I was like, okay, I'm not saying it's not impressive, but let's not pretend that that wasn't improv. And it was relatively basic improv. It was just not stumbling over your words and just making shit up. That's kind of fucking it. That's not been foreshadowed in any. That's why I was confused. I was like, has this been foreshadowed? Like, is this more specific than I think it is? And no, it's just he just made up a flower. He could have said anything. It doesn't matter. The players don't know. They don't know that flower didn't exist before now. If you're confident and you just say it and no one's got a problem, then you're DMing. You're good. Who cares? And if you're learning and you say something and a player that does know the rules hops in and corrects you, fantastic. Now you've learned. You're a new DM. They all know that. You're learning the rules, maybe along with them, maybe, kind of from them, whatever. So yeah, fuck it. Like, just get out there and DM. You'll learn the rules as you go. And if you don't know a rule in the moment, just make something up. Yeah, great advice.
Doing when players ask you, you can be like, oh, just roll a dexterity check. It may not be what most people would do, but players all know that, and just fudge it and have fun going with it. Half of being a dungeon master is just bullshitting your way through it anyway. That's half of what I do with these guys. So as long as you're confident with that, but don't show that you're bullshitting, you're fine. It's all smoke and mirrors, man.
Thank you.
No worries.
Look, I'll say it again. I think this is one of the things that I guess has become one of my running talking points with Critical Role. It's all smoke and mirrors. Matt does not do nearly as much on the back end as people seem to think he does. I almost guarantee it. And I mean, he nearly said it right there. It's all smoke and mirrors. Fudge it. Make shit up in the meantime that feels right and that seems right and go from there. It doesn't, as long as the players can never tell, it doesn't matter what's happening behind the screen. If your players can't tell, you could just be hitting a soundboard with different dice rolling sounds every time you're supposed to be rolling. And as long as they cannot tell, everything feels challenging and the stakes feel real and victories feel satisfying and losses feel preventable or like they have narrative significance. Who cares what's happening behind the screen? It doesn't matter.
Hello, my name is Alex Maxwell. I was at your guys' WarnerCon panel. I got it because of you.
I got it because of you!
Yeah. Where I asked you guys to help me solve a problematic player with his metagame druid. Resolution, he's really, really dead.
That's a way to do it.
The chapter...
Wait, I have to rewind. Let's see.
I asked you guys to help me solve a problematic player with his metagame druid. Resolution, he's really, really dead.
Yeah, if someone said this to me and I was trying to be nice, in fact, I'm almost certain that someone has put in a story reminiscent of this, and I think I gave a response very similar to Matt's of that's one way to do it. 'Cause that sounds bad, but I don't have enough context to know if it was bad.
That's a way to do it.
The chapter Tower of Fiends is all because of you guys and saying, make his friends kill him. So he was possessed, and the cleric said, F that, and crushes him with a shield. So well done.
That's sadistic. I love it.
Yeah. My household is, but as a DM,
Dude, that's like... I'm so confused as to how that would have even happened. Because there's like 4 scenarios that I can build in my head, and I don't like any of them. It's like scenario 1, he didn't get unpossessed when he went downed. which is just homebrewing a different mechanic. That's not possession. I guess it's super possession. I don't know. Which possession is already iffy for kind of part of this reason. So an even more intense version of that, I don't know. Second option, the friend didn't know he was possessed, and so that's why he killed him? That's the only one that I can be like, okay, maybe that's a player fault, but also sounds like this DM set this up to deal with a metagaming druid. So I don't know. Third option, players knew that he wasn't, or maybe just didn't know that he wasn't possessed when he went downed. Maybe there's that, but and maybe that's on the players for not like interrogating him afterwards. I don't know. Still feels weird. And then the fourth option, which is that his friend knew that the party member knew that he was not possessed anymore when he went down and just killed him anyways. Or overkilled him somehow. But I can't really see that happening for like a druid and a cleric unless they're really low level. But you're possessing your low level characters? I don't know. I want to re-listen to that one more time.
You guys and saying, make his friends kill him. So he was possessed, and the cleric said, F that, and crushes him with a shield. So well done.
That's sadistic. I love it.
Yeah. My household is, but as a DM, I know sometimes like the DM burnout can sort of build up after.
Yeah, I don't know. It didn't sound better on the repeat viewing. I don't know. It's weird because any individual segment of this, I can I can be like, super possession, kind of weird, not into it, but whatever. And I can create scenarios in my head for like, oh, the players, his other players did this, his other players did this. But this is all couched within, he was a problem player. I learned from you, make his friends kill him. And that solved it, which is like, yeah. Again, I don't want to just like throw shade at this guy. Probably a nice guy. Probably has a much better table now. I'm gonna assume. But so I'm not saying like he's a bad DM or he's bad, but that strategy is not how I would ever recommend dealing with a problem player. If that's truly what the goal there was. That sounds like something that will breed resentment and will not have a good effect above the table. And we can all laugh about it and say, oh, well, he deserves it. He's a problem player. Fuck problem players. Fuck metagamers. We don't fuck with them. So, get what's coming to him, right? Do you want to keep playing with them or not? Because if that's the attitude that we're having of they do something bad, so I'm going to do something bad back to them, we're fighting fire with fire, I guess. That's not breeding a healthy table environment. That is accelerating the fire. That's just accelerating that person leaving the table, or the table breaking up entirely if they refuse to leave. And if that situation prompted a conversation with that player to talk about their metagaming, that's a conversation that could have been had without doing the in-game actions. So, especially in terms of metagaming, metagaming is a definitionally an outside of the game trait. It is bringing in outside knowledge and then making your character act in unexpected or strange ways that are unexplainable except with out-of-game knowledge. It's an out-of-game thing that affects the in-game. And punishing someone in-game for something out-of-game, or vice versa, are both bad. I can say that pretty unequivocally. Like, if I play a video game, if I'm playing fucking Super Smash Brothers Melee against my friend and he beats my ass all night, I'm not gonna treat him like shit the next day at lunch. That shit happened in the game. You gotta leave it there, and vice versa. If you're having beef with someone outside of the game, you can't let that come into the game and like wreck the story and have like a really defining effect on the story. Yeah.
Well, and Matt, how do you, every week, especially with some of the more challenging personalities and the people that play them.
You're just closest to me. It's really
Okay.
Saying that Matt has to deal with challenging personalities, I unironically don't know who he's talking about. I have to imagine it's either Percy or Keyleth or Scanlan. It's like gotta be one of those three. But like, again, the idea of that connecting to burnout, like there's just a lot of subtext here of like, how do you not burn out given that you play with challenging personalities, which again, the only challenging personalities I can really think of are like, I guess Sam, Marisha, and Taliesin. But like, that is an because none of them are Orion. And even in reference to Orion, as I've said before, I think Orion was just at the wrong table. Truly. Like, obviously, there's all sorts of personal life shit going on, but in terms of his actual on-the-board play, that play probably would have been pretty acceptable at other tables. He didn't do a lot of things that I can't imagine there being a table that exists that would be cool with it. Honestly. And Sam and Marisha and Taliesin are even more tame in terms of that sort of thing. Like, so the thing that I'm kind of dancing around, I'm kind of struggling to articulate, viewing, I'd be very curious to know what he means by metagaming Druid from before, because considering them challenging players and considering the behavior that anyone at the table exhibits potentially having an effect on your like level of DM burnout, and the idea being that you just have to change something, because that's what he did when describing him having a problem player, is he created in fiction content to deal with that rather than having a conversation with them. And so saying, how do you change your DMing to adapt to any of the players in Vox Machina? It's like, I want to hear what Matt has to say, because not every player is right for every table, but you should not change your game for anything that, like, any of those three have done. I mean, like, I just can't. I don't know. I can't picture it. Like, and so it's like saying that, like, okay, you have challenging people you have to deal with. How do you stop from burning out on that? It implies that there is, like, a more ideal player, that if you just had the right players at your table, then burnout would be solved, and you would not struggle at all to, like, keep the motivation. And I think that that's true on the edges. Like, I think that there are, again, like, certain players that don't fit at certain tables. But that range is big. At least I think it should be. I don't know. Maybe I'm being overly harsh here, and maybe his range of acceptable play is just very tight. It's a very tight band, and that's okay. But the less flexible you are and the tighter that band is, I mean, that's going to start presenting its own problems. If you can't, like, flex to other people's styles. I don't know.
It's like it's kind of like writer's block or any other creative entertainment medium, just keeping that stream flowing fresh.
I will say, for one thing, you guys kind of inspire me to keep going. Like, but no, it's the positive feedback from the community is so overwhelming on a consistent basis, and watching these guys' faces light up every week that we play, that's enough to keep me even pushing through the mildest bit of writer's block.
We love you, Dad. I can't say that. That's weird.
Yeah, please don't. No. But you know, there can be times where it gets hard, and if you have the opportunity of not having a weekly show that people are like, when's the next episode, man? If you feel in that block, take a break. Like, find a point in the story where you can have a hiatus, like resolve one storyline, and then tell players will come back in a few months, and you'll be like a 6-month or a year time jump, and you can write stories during that time of what they do in the interim. And in the meantime, have somebody else try to GM for a while, or maybe try a different system for a few game sessions to just kind of cleanse your palate and get back to being inspired again. Everyone has their own techniques, and I can't really tell you what works for you because each person's method is different. But if you need to take a break and step away and try something else for a change, go for it. Sometimes that might be just enough to kind of shake you free of that stuck point.
Thank you, and you guys gave me some great voice acting advice at one.
Yeah, I mean, great advice, I think. Solid advice. I definitely struggle with, like, burnout and writer's block. So yeah, I think I just that all seemed like solid advice. There's nothing else I would say. I mean, he, didn't really acknowledge any of the alternative stuff, but also he's not trying to get in a dialogue. He's just trying to answer a question. So I very much understand not engaging with that subtext. Or just kind of laughing it off as a joke, whatever.
It's made a huge difference, so thank you a lot.
Awesome.
Let's just.
This is also why I feel somewhat bad and, like, awkward, and, like, I kept trying to preface of, like, I'm not trying to go after this guy, because if everyone is having fun, that is just the most important part. If that metagaming player, if the table and the players were okay with it, then that's fine. It's just the lessons sounded all wrong. And I don't want to be too harsh, but I also don't want, new GMs to look at that and be like, yeah, that's how I deal with a problem player. I deal with it in fiction. Maybe that works for that table. I've been at tables where the real life and the fiction gets crossed. It's not good. It's happened at multiple tables that I've run at, and it happens less now. That I kind of think a lot of the people that I play with are a little bit older. I think it happened more when I was younger and a little bit less able to like separate those sorts of emotions. But I truly don't see a scenario where I would recommend that. If you stumble onto it and it really, really works for your table, great. That's awesome. But it's not something I would experiment with. It's not something I would just try out to see if it's right for your table. I would avoid it. Yeah.
Clarify that our advice was not to kill his friends.
Thanks, Sam.
My name is Jacob.
Hello, Jacob.
Hello. I am finishing running my campaign, sort of winding down, so I was playing a campaign for a bunch of brand new players who have never really played before, and one of them's really excited about DMing, but is incredibly nervous. What sort of advice would you give and sort of help would you provide to a person who you want to be able to play in their game when they run it? So you obviously don't know their whole story and help them build it, but you kind of want to give them courage, help them build a game, that way they feel comfortable with it.
I mean, first and foremost, know that it's nerve-wracking. To this day, I still get nervous a little before every session, and that's good. That kind of driving nervous energy is what gets you into it. Don't want to over-prepare, because as Liam mentioned earlier, while with children, it's not that different with adults sometimes. You prepare this much and you only get to maybe that much of it often. So you want to prepare enough to where you feel comfortable, at least, slightly flesh out many things as opposed to really fleshing out one thing, because if they divert, you'll be lost. And anywhere in that space that you kind of prepare, at least you can kind of, go with it and make up stuff in that realm that you're pseudo-prepared for.
Absolutely. I mean, this is very... Obviously, Matt doesn't have Obsidian up and and ready for these questions, but that's the exact sort of thing that I'm hitting on with these, concentric circles that I showed earlier. It's like you want to slightly prepare, these things. Like, I think that this is better than, let's call it like that sized, than, this. Right? I mean, even if there's maybe theoretically more content, packed into here, and, the characters are right at the center of it, even if there's more content packed into here, dude, if they divert straight into the fours, ooh, you are going to be thrown for a loop. And I think the real reality is, even if you think it's this, more often there are holes. There are holes. And even this, like the numbers that I came up with, those were just kind of off the top of my head. I'd say even more along the lines of this is maybe even more what I go for. You like Matt said, you want to have it prepped out where they are, but every step away from that should get less and less prepped. But you want to have this huge circle, because it is very PC. It's very, very player character to just give you a fucking left turn. You thought that they were going down this path that you had all tens for. Everything that's on that path, but then they divert. And it's way better for the diversion to divert into somewhere with a 6 or even somewhere with a 3. It's way better for it to divert into somewhere with a 3 than for it to divert into a 0. It's even better for it to divert into a 1 than for it to divert into a point where you have absolutely nothing ready. And this is something that I'm not good at following this advice. The reason that I've been thinking about it a lot is because I've been trying to somewhat systematize it for myself to try and get myself to follow it. Because I have such a tendency to accidentally go way too deep into a section that I just don't fucking need to. I just don't need to be developing the economy of this place that I gave a small rumor on the newspaper to. That they're not even, they haven't even mentioned out loud. I don't need to be diving into their imports and exports. Stop it. So it's good. It's really great advice. I wish I could follow it more. Because I think that it would really help my campaigns both feel deeper and it would be less work for me. So I am trying to do this, but I know it's correct. Whenever I do it, it's awesome. But I'm just not great at it.
And all in all, have fun and ensure the players have a good time. You know, unless everyone wants to play that hardcore Tomb of Horrors like game where it's like, no, you're fucking dead, deal with it, your turn. Then you want to make sure that the players are feeling fulfilled, that they're having heroic moments, that they're having heroic failures, and that the story itself is engaging. And honestly, the only way you can prepare for that.
I think that's a great great way to describe it. And I would say even in that Tomb of Horrors game, you should still ensure that they are engaged, that they are having, that they're still having a good time. Not everything has to be happy. Not everything has to be fun. Like the Sun Tree, when during the Briarwood arc, when they first get to Whitestone, the Sun Tree's not fun. It's not happy. So I wouldn't even call it enjoyable. But it was engaging. It was satisfying to an extent. It was gripping. They were incredibly engaged within the story, and it made their defeat of the Briarwoods that much more satisfying. And I think even if you're going for a Tomb of Horrors, you can die at any time, whatever, kill you, you're dead, fuck you, sort of game. That is not the same as saying make your game less engaging. Those sorts of games can still be incredibly engaging. Just because you're not getting, kind of married to your character, you can much more play it like Dark Souls. You can have these characters that go into the meat grinder. You can have a resurrection mechanic where you start at the beginning of the dungeon. You can have an Outer Wilds type deal where you're, going through this kind of loop. And so even if you die, death is not the end, and you will come back and you will try again, and every single death will make that one victory just that little bit more satisfying. But that's kind of the bottom of it. It's satisfaction. It's engagement. It's not necessarily like fun and happiness and even delight to an extent. It's satisfaction. And I think that every game of D&D should have that, kind of no matter their tone. Even like the most silly beer and chips type of game should still be satisfying to play in the same way that a board game is satisfying to play, or a fucking, let's go with the most beer and chips thing I can think of. A football game is engaging to watch. Some of them. The best football games are engaging to watch. They're tight. They have drama. They have conflict. They have great storylines. Those are the most engaging football games to watch, even though that's a very beer and chips type activity. So it's all of these things. I think it kind of doesn't matter really what your game is at the end of the day. Engagement and satisfaction are really important at the end of it. And whether you get that through drama, through overcoming impossible challenges, through deep character work, however your table goes about getting there, that's all up to you. But getting to that core, to that nugget, is always there. Okay, the video is over. That was interesting. That was very interesting. I don't know. My biggest, sort of takeaway things was that I was surprised with how many like alternate universe, what if, hypotheticals, what does Grog drink on a hot afternoon type questions that there were. I was surprised by that, but yeah, it's very interesting to see where the critter community was at that point, the kinds of questions that they were asking, the things that were on their mind. Like, even it's small, but like them talking about like people asking what's the next character you would play, and them being like, well, we don't want to say because we might end up playing it. Like, even we talk all the time about how the cast didn't really know what they had. They, underestimate the level of fandom that had developed. But I think at a certain point, or in a certain way, Critters had also kind of underestimated what they had on their hands. I don't think all of them were considering a campaign 2 to be on the horizon. I don't think they were. And even like some people asked about like, guest players having their own little episode and like maybe even like a mini arc. I don't think that the concept of what Critical Role was had really like solidified within the within the community yet. And to an extent, things are always going to be flexible, malleable. They're going to change, but it's something that really stood out to me throughout this Q&A. Beyond that, it was cool to hear Matt reaffirm some things that I thought. Reaffirm some things about his level of behind the scenes fuckery and him encourage and the things that he encouraged and even in situations where, at least in my opinion, it seemed like people maybe took the wrong thing away from the game, when it actually came down to Matt or a player answering a question, they seem to have the same backing, at least the same backing mindset that I do when it comes to DMing and when it comes to playing. So that was cool to see. Well, that's about it. Again, let me know what you thought of this new format. And I definitely did not include even nearly all the questions. I didn't include all the questions that I talked about. I tried to cut it down to just the best and the brightest. And so let me know what you think of that. And let me know what you think of everything. What were any no, I can't do the whole YouTube thing. It's so fake. Yeah. Fuck, how do I sign off? But I will leave you with that, unless editing me comes back for vengeance, I guess. And thank you for watching, and I'll talk to y'all next time. Goodbye.